Disidentification. Disidentification is a spiritual practice that many people have heard about or are familiar with in other ways. I think sometimes there's like other words that are used, but basically it's disidentifying. What we are talking about is creating space and releasing, creating a kind of freedom from the ego, the mind, and our identification with the mind, that we are our thoughts, that we are our beliefs, that we are our emotions. I wanted to talk about this because I understand that when I experience this with clients sometimes and things, there can be a bit of a friction around feeling a little sense of invalidation or something like that when you hear the notion this thought is not real. Because obviously and understandably, when you are in a thought, words like that, things like your thoughts aren't real, these emotions are just something that's here, and this belief is just something that is here. Creating that kind of space when you are right in it and you are really personally identified with it in that moment creates a kind of egoic friction. That's actually what's happening. But it's understandably, it can be painful. So I wanted to talk about like the correct way to engage with disidentification to not create this kind of friction, and it's almost, when we are speaking objectively, we're talking about a kind of egoic defensive feeling or defense mechanism. That's one thing that I want to cover, hopefully. But we're gonna begin by listening to my spirit guides who have some words on this as well, and as well as it's always a mix of me and my guides and so on. So just 1 second while we listen. So my guide is saying that disidentification is a recognition that you are a light body, that you are a light form, a light being, and that what you are holding as your personal truth is not necessarily your absolute truth. Okay, these things can be recognized as different thought forms, different electrical waves of energy, different things that are passing through you, the light container of all that is within, relative to your experience and your reality, etc. Many people have a current understanding that this should mean that these aspects of you should not be met with love. There are some spiritual leaders who have, he's saying that this practice has been taken too far by certain individuals to the point where there is a gap between what they are experiencing and what the person identifying things with is experiencing. And I would just note that the bridge is built of compassion. It is a compassionate bridge, and that's what is sometimes missing when you see that friction between someone who is saying to a spiritual leader, oh, I feel sadness, I feel da 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 da, and they go, oh, that's just your mind, you're not your mind. There's this sense of just ignore it or something disconnected like that, and this can be a painful experience. And that is why my guide is saying that is why there are light beings such as these, pointing to me, who are here to essentially create a bridge of compassion between the personable human experience and the recognition of the light force body that you are. And he's referencing my personal suffering, which is something I wanted to talk about anyway. He's telling me to just go on, which is that I had immense suffering in my life, in my body, in my experience. I had a lot of childhood trauma to the degree that I nearly died multiple times. I tried to end my life once. And there came a point where I could not tolerate my mind anymore. And I had been working with the mind, and I had been doing practices that were allowing me to engage with the mind. You could consider it under the umbrella of psychotherapies, and that is really useful to a degree. But I went through a thing where I kind of became afraid of my mind because of all the trauma that it held. I could not tolerate the experience of that trauma, so becoming so completely aware of it so quickly by engaging with a mind that has been hurt, that has been damaged in the way that I was. And there's some nuances to this. I'm leaving some things out, but the point is that I needed something to create space between me and my mind so that I could actually meet with my mind from love, or meet with it at all. And up at that point, I had not been practicing any kind of disidentification. It dots in and there, but it wasn't my main thing. And that obviously wasn't going very well because I was still falling into very dark places and meeting with dark aspects of myself. And then I had a very terrible night one night, soon after I had attempted, and I could not tolerate what my mind was doing, so I could not engage with it. And this is where my spiritual awakenings, probably the deepest one, occurred, where I was brought fully into the now moment because of my inability and lack of capacity to tolerate my mind. It's one of those experiences that it's difficult to put into words, but I met with the notion that I had to stop believing my mind. I had to stop believing the thoughts that were leading me into suicidal places, or I was going to die. And it just occurred to me that I had to stop. I just had to stop. And when your life is on the brink like that and you feel so out of control, that was all that I could do, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done because the things that were coming up for me emotionally were so powerful and strong, and because of the extremity of the trauma that I've had in the past, we're talking about extreme abuse, we're talking about torture, these electrical charges that I have within me are very strong. The ones that I chose into this life to work with are very, very strong. So it was very powerful, and it was a very difficult time, but somehow I managed to survive, and I managed to not believe my thoughts that night. And it was creating such a friction in my being that I had a kind of ego collapse thing. Energetically, one could just feel a type of shattering occurring. And then over a few days, I started to come into the now moment. And then I recognized that this is what everything was. And I had these awakenings such as everything just is. But the point relative to this topic is that I was able to bring that awakening, that truth, to my relationship with thoughts and feelings, that also they just are. And that they became sacred to me. They became like these beautiful light offerings. And I understood that all was perfect. I was having these sorts of awakenings, and I was able to see that what was passing through me, all that it wanted to do was pass through me. And when I gradually, because I had become very almost re-traumatized by the extremity of that suicidal place I was in, very gradually in time, not on those particular days, but I began to allow feelings. I practiced the feeling of allowing. And I also had to just listen to my guides and listen to my own inner truth, because all that I had been trying to work with was failing me. The level of trauma that I have experienced in my life when you've been tortured since a young child, this is something that most people will never engage with and never understand. But it needs something else. And I believe that that's part of why I had that experience, was to come into this awakening that this is what is needed. A practice of disidentification. Of course, there's always things, I'm not saying that I don't do more mind-based practices or energy and, you know, painting. Like, there's so many different ways to heal. But you tend to find something that works primarily in a primary way for you. The thing is that disidentification is coming about now because this is sort of my guide continuing. It is coming about now because of the fluidity of the time, he says time stretch, and I'm like, what's that? What does that mean? He's talking about the timeline that's unfolding, and there's a kind of unfoldment, so that's the stretching. This shift that we are going through is going to require of you to recognize that you are a light being and an energy being first. That's the main message from my spiritual team and higher light in general about disidentification. It is to recognize that you are a light being, an energy-based being first. And there is this sacred truth that you are not your thoughts. You are not the belief that you hold or the things your thoughts and beliefs are making you think and feel. We have a habit of, when we have a sadness arise, I am sad comes out of our mouth. And that is okay depending on how you're doing it, depending on what that means to you. For most of us, there's not a lot of consciousness going into that, and so we are declaring energetically something to continue to be, and that is, and this isn't about being in denial, but it's about just recognizing that that sadness is actually a distortion in your energetic pathways. It's an energetic scar that has occurred. The energy is trying to come through, and it goes blah 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 blah. And this is where, and this is another topic, but essentially there are portals here to trauma. Times of trauma, unprocessed emotion is held there through this portal that I will talk about in a different video. But that is what's happening. And yes, there is kind of a part of your energetic being that is there, awaiting, and it needs your presence and love and all of that. But even that energetic being that has gone through that trauma and is waiting there to experience unity with you again instead of fragmentation, is the sadness that aspect is holding is not him or her. It is just a feeling that they've been dealing with since that time happened. So we need to recognize what feelings and energies and things actually are. And if you're doing disidentification correctly, it's always about love. Everything with healing in general, I should say, is about love. Like, I have clients ask me all the time, well, what do I do with this, or what do I do with this? And I ask myself that question. And it's like, when you're not sure of the answer, what feels like love? What is most loving? It may be loving to practice disidentification. It may be loving on another day to talk with a friend. This is a thing. But the disidentification thing is really important because of this transitionary period that we are in at the moment, where we are trying to elevate our consciousness radically. And it is time for a radical approach and a love-based energy approach. Okay? When you are like, okay, I have a feeling here and it feels like sadness. The way that disidentification should be done is about acknowledgement, observation, and acknowledgement is like description as well. You will notice if you have a sadness and you say, I feel sadness. You don't say I am sad. You say I feel sadness in my body. It feels like a heaviness. It feels like this weird empty feeling. I can't even describe this feeling. there is something interesting that happens, and it's almost very subtle, but you will feel a kind of spaciousness. There's this little window. You're creating a little window. Because when you are identified, when we are personally identified with anything, you are feeding into it because you are a powerful creator being who creates with their consciousness, their focus, your attention. What you are focused on is like charging something. It's like you're gonna charge into your life in terms of manifesting more what you are focused on. But it's not just what you are focused on, it is how you are focusing towards it. When I am focused on sadness in the way that we might simply describe of, oh my gosh, I'm so sad, I'm crying, like telling a friend, for example, like, this is just too much, he hates me, da da da, whatever you might say. You're in that charge, you're feeding that charge. You are, and you can say those words and not be feeding it if you are also having an awareness within yourself. There's this natural loving awareness behind that is listening to this part, that is feeling all of these things. Because that awareness that you are listening to a part of yourself is creating a spaciousness and a disidentification. Because you're seeing it as, okay, this is a reflection of the beliefs that I'm holding, the emotions that are stored, etc. So disidentification is really important, and it's about coming into the present moment in an accurate way. That is what my guides are saying. We are not really embodied into the present at the moment. Like generally speaking, that is something that humans struggle with. We want to, when I have a sadness and I am like describing it, acknowledging it, observing it, and allowing it as the next step of that, I allow this to be here. I feel that I'm feeling this. I feel this. And you just breathe, and your attention, your focus is on the body rather than the mental story that is occurring. That is an accurate focus into the now moment, even when you're kind of working with something that's from the past. That is an accurate focus. We have to be aware of this subtle difference between being engaged with a story and the mental sort of lens, and it being actually present here. Disidentification is about this presence. But yeah, it is true that there are, unfortunately, like some spiritual leaders and stuff that have kind of, they've taken it in an inaccurate approach, essentially. When you disidentify, even if you became like kind of very non-egoic and very like, okay, everything I feel is just a feeling, when you become not believing your thoughts, not believing your story anymore, and you're very just, there's an objectivity, this is the natural perspective of the natural soul, the natural loving awareness that is your soul. It's just like, yep, this is here. It's very like, this is here, now this is here, and there's a love and a presence and a stillness. Even if you became completely like that, you are still going to have ripples, like I'd say ripples of emotional awarenesses coming through you. Even if you've cleansed like a bajillion million of your traumas, you are still a receiver being here. We use emotions as a compass to navigate our life here. They're in an energetic reflection is what I'm saying. It's an energetic system. So for someone to be like, I never feel like anything other than that love and stillness and stuff, it's, if they're saying it as simply as that and that's it, that is inaccurate, and there's probably some denial and dissociation going on there, and an over identification with the disidentified self, which is a very sort of I don't know, a trap thing that you need to be aware of when you are practicing disidentification. You don't want to build another identity on on I am the loving awareness, I am the soul. It's like you do. I was asking my guide about this yesterday. How can we avoid creating like a persona with that? And they were saying that it's not about not seeing that that is the truth of who you are, but it is about not getting into it in a way where it feeds into a denial relationship between you and all the other like emotions that are passing through you and things like that. You'll know if you are like, nope, I am a soul, because of what I'm saying, that emotions still pass through you. You're still a human being. You're aware that you are this loving energy that is holding space for and is a receiver or container for outside emotional energy and outside energy that is transformed into emotion to be a compass for us, and your inner stuff that your soul is working on. This is still going to be experienced through you. So it is this disidentification is to practice. I know that I am this loving awareness. I don't believe my thoughts. This would be if you totally mastered it. I know that I have loving awareness and that I am that loving awareness energy. I know I am the soul. I know I am a light body energy-based being that is receiving and translating and transforming stored emotional energy, external energies that are sent through my receiving system, and I receive as emotion. And the beliefs and thoughts that cross through my mind, I understand it for what it is, which is essentially this giant coping mechanism. Honestly, it is a coping mechanism for feeling unsafe in the world and trying to, the mind, when it comes to being in the now, it doesn't know what to do with that. It's very like, that's why it kind of, and there's a dissipation of the mind, right? And so there's a panic of survival, and it's because we're in a society that has really fed into this thing that you are the mind, and so there's attachment to it, and there's attachment to the identity. The mind is the keeper of identity, which is your persona is a compilation of the thoughts and beliefs that you have carried and experienced, and kind of like aspects of you bouncing off of that and relating to the world like that. But yeah, if you're totally into successful disidentification, it's stuff like I'm not my mind. The mind is just a thing that is at times helping me to do mental things, because there is a mental aspect to the world that is natural that we as humans use to create. That's the natural purpose of mind, is for you to have somewhere to come up with ideas and think about things, but even then there is a blending of intuition, and at some point we're not going to need it. We're not going to need it anymore. But yeah, you understand that it is just a thing that is reacting to, and that's what you understand if you start watching the mind. And a really clear sort of, I don't know, example or something of this is when I notice that the mind is more active if I am feeling unsafe or anxious. Okay, because the mind wants to come up and help you control and stay safe and survive. So that's what it's about in its core. And it's trying to keep you safe, but it is to bring this loving awareness to the mind and to wrap it in love and be like, you know, you're okay, I'm okay. And then there is a dissipation of the mind, and then you are just aware that you are love. And we would be more fully in the now and all of these beautiful things. So don't reject disidentification because you have a negative reaction when someone says like, oh, you have a mental story. If someone says that to you without compassion, this is just an inappropriate use of that concept, of the concept of disidentification. To be aware as well of what I was saying in the beginning is that this egoic friction will occur. Can you see what that is? Can you see that you don't want to be told that it's a story for a reason? And just explore that. Why? Why? Because you're making it mean like I am invalidated, I shouldn't feel how I feel. That's probably the primary thing. And just because you recognize that it's a story, or just because you recognize the non-validity in your beliefs, don't make it mean that you shouldn't feel your feeling. No one is saying that. But that is something that we can arise in us. I've seen just arising. And to be honest, it's when you do disidentification, you actually are able to meet with yourself in such a more clear and held way than ever before. Disidentification gives you the capacity to be okay with whatever's here, because you're understanding just what it is. It's just a thought. It's not going to hurt me. It's just a memory. It's not going to do anything to me. It's just a wave. It's just a wave passing through. And this is how I would hope that you relate to disidentification. There's probably a lot more to say on this topic, but I think I just wanted to dip into different things to share about this, because I see it coming up a lot. So thank you for listening, and I will see you soon.